If you want to see perhaps the most intellectual version of this idea of how the ritual order upholds the social order, which upholds the natural order, look into the writings of the philosophical Stoics of the Greeks. This is what Stoicism was all about. For the Stoics, the universe was God. You wanted to know God, you studied the universe, and you knew the laws and the order of the universe. But again, if you upset it all, the whole balance would collapse. This is also, by the way, where astrology comes from. Why do we think that the motions of the planets or the motions of the stars somehow affect our lives? Because, according to that philosophy, the stars are planetary intelligences or intelligences in the sky. The motions of the macrocosm in the universe affect ourselves, the microcosm down here. As a matter of fact, to be quite honest, if you think about the logic of it, one can only truly believe in astrology if you believe in this kind of religion. Because there's no reason for the stars to affect us unless we believe that our experience as human beings in the actions that we do somehow affects the macrocosm in the way the macrocosm affects us. There really is no logic. It makes a lot of sense if you live in late antiquity and you're a Stoic to be an astrologer. It doesn't make too much sense now in the context of monotheism. So, it's in this kind of environment where the monotheism of Islam comes. Now, I think it's important to point out that in the history of religions, monotheism, the belief in one God, represents one of the most important and fundamental changes in consciousness and in the worldview that have ever existed. I would call it perhaps the greatest conceptual revolution in the history of religion. Because monotheism, in its essence, breaks through that level of ritual that tends to separate the human being from his creator and allows a direct contact, a direct communication in a way that was only possible for a few. Remember, an oracle, for example, could get a message. A soothsayer could get a message. Somebody with a jinni on his shoulder could get a message. But now what was originally open only to the few becomes accessible to the many. And that's expressed, I think, very beautifully in the Quran, in the passage of the Quran that talks about the dawning consciousness of the Prophet Abraham. In Islam, in the Quran, the Prophet Abraham is not only the first monotheist, he's also sort of the quintessential monotheist. And this is why the revelations that Islam commemorates start with the Prophet Abraham. And let me again just read this to you. You can find this in Surah 6, ayahs 75 to 79. So also did we show Abraham the power and the laws of the heavens and the earth, so that he might have certainty. When the night covered him over, he saw a star, and he said, "This is my Lord." But when the star set, he said, "I love not those that set." When he saw the moon rising in splendor, he said, "This is my Lord." But when the moon set, he said, "Unless my Lord guides me, I shall certainly be among those who go astray." When he saw the sun rising in splendor, he said, "This is my Lord, this is the greatest of all." But when the sun set, he said, "O my people, I am indeed free from your giving partners to God. For me, I have set my face as a hanif," this term here, "towards him who created the heavens and the earth, and never shall I give partners to God." So you see here in this story of Abraham's conversion, if you will, there's a progression of consciousness toward something that's more and more lasting, something that's more and more powerful, that seems to dominate the heavens, dominate the macrocosm more and more. Finally, he comes to the religion of sun, the sun worship, which is so common in polytheistic religions and so-called paganism. And yet the sun itself is not enough, and he finally transcends forms to the reality that lies behind forms. Yeah?
What's your opinion of interpretations of Abraham not really as a monotheist, but I think it's called henotheist?
Oh, henotheist. Well, this goes back to something actually I was going to talk about, because now this is the Islamic take on things. But if you go back, of course, to the Hebrew Bible and biblical studies, there's a lot of discussion as to what early Judaism really was. One of the discussions postulates something called pre-Judaism, in which, as you say, people were supposedly henotheistic. Henotheism means that you have your own divinity that you follow exclusively, but that you allow others sort of the right to theirs. In other words, you see yours as first among equals. That is perhaps possible. And again, from the Islamic point of view, one really can't get to the historical Abraham because Abraham is such a symbolic figure in the Quran. I mean, again, it really doesn't matter whether or not this particular passage reflects what Abraham actually said, because what it is, it's sort of giving a schematic of the human being's progress in consciousness, sort of up the evolutionary ladder of religion, if you want to call it that. Now, by the way, I think we have in early Judaism a number of terms and a number of concepts in which there's a sort of a bridge between monotheism and some of the religious conceptions that went earlier. For example, there's the idea of divine names. For example, we have El Elyon, okay, the Most High, or God Most High, El Shaddai, God Almighty. So there's a sort of particularization of the one. And indeed, we have this as well in Islam. The idea of the power of the name, I think, is something we ought to look at as well.